So welcome everyone. Welcome to the West Coast Climate Action Network's Lunch and Learn webinar with Kristin Denby and Charlotte Bull from the BC Assembly of First Nations Low Carbon Transportation Project. We're honored to be able to make this happen and share all the good work that's happening with the BC AFN. So WeCan is an active, growing, volunteer-run network of 275 climate action groups across BC, all of which share our feeling of urgency about the reality of the climate crisis. Our determined hope is that together we can make a difference and build a better world. For my own part, I was born in England and have lived in the land now known as Canada for 36 years, currently on the traditional lands of the Struminas First Nation near Ladysmith on Vancouver Island. So our guests today are Kristy and Charlotte. So Kristy is a researcher and sustainability professional whose diverse career has led her to work on water and land reform policy research in South Africa, sustainable and regenerative tourism training and development across Canada, and environmental assessments with a focus on Indigenous community impacts in Northeast BC and Alberta, and in the high Amazon region of Peru. She has an interdisciplinary Master's in Science of International Development from the Norwegian Institute of Land Sciences, and is the environmental policy analyst with the BC Assembly of First Nations. Charlotte is a climate action policy analyst with the BC AFN, with a variety of background in a variety of policy domains, including climate, transportation, health, foreign policy, and human rights. She has a master's in public policy and global affairs from UBC and a Bachelor of Arts in political science and geography from Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. During her master's, she had the opportunity to work with BC AFN as a sustainability scholar, where she researched the barriers that First Nations community face to accessible, affordable, and reliable low carbon transport. So let's jump straight into things because the time is short. And Kristy, are you going to take it away? Well, Charlotte is
Yeah,
still struggling with her sound. Off you go, Kristy.
thank you for the wonderful introduction. And our apologies. I would have liked to co-present with my colleague Charlotte, but she'll be supporting and able to provide feedback in the chat if I miss anything. We'd really like to kind of keep the presentation shorter and open up for dialogue. And really thankful and grateful for this space today and to share this work, this important work. I'm joining today from Northern Secwepemc Territory in Williams Lake, BC, and I grew up in Tanaha Territory in Windermere, BC, and it's an honor to be doing this work. And thank you again for hosting us. So, if for those of you that aren't familiar with the BCAFN, we're a provincial territorial organization. We advocate on behalf of the 204 First Nations in BC. We're led by our regional chief, Terry TG, who's elected by First Nations chiefs and assemblies, and he's in his third term, and he's supported by a board of directors. And really, the focus of BCFN is advocacy and for the rights, title, and interests of First Nations in BC, and we're guided by resolutions. Our work is all guided by resolutions passed at BCFN Chiefs Assemblies, which we host twice a year. So we collaborate with the First Nations or are a member of the First Nations Leadership Council. So we collaborate very closely with the First Nations Summit, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs on various files, climate being one of them. So, in recognition of the escalating climate emergency, some of you may be aware of the BC First Nations Climate Strategy and Action Plan, which BCFN, in collaboration with the First Nations Leadership Council, was mandated to develop this plan in 2019, and it was formally endorsed in 2022 when implementation began. And so the climate strategy was a response to, the lack of engagement or incorporation of First Nations perspectives or, different needs or different viewpoints in Clean BC and other government policies. And so this is really the strategy is, there's a lot of actions within there, and they're really about supporting First Nations and asserting and protecting title rights and treaty rights again, related to climate change and ensuring First Nations knowledge, laws, governance systems, worldviews are really incorporated into climate planning, but also climate action. So we received the mandate for this project, which this low carbon transportation project really was an action within the BC First Nations Climate Strategy and Action Plan. The resolution to do this work was passed via Resolution 1223, mandating BCFN to assess gaps and opportunities that restrict and assist First Nations in BC to access equitable, safe, reliable, and affordable low carbon transportation and active transportation and transportation services within and between communities, and to really provide recommendations for improved legislation policy program reform to advance these goals. So some background, First Nations in BC really, historically and still today have, extensive land and water transportation routes and facilitated trade and travel and cultural exchanges and ceremonies and kinships across vast distances. If you think of the Grease Trail or many of, the major river systems in this province, and many of the major highways do cross kind of traditional trails as well. So there is a long history of First Nations really leading the way in terms of transportation and building those vast networks, and really colonization, the reserve system, and discrimination and the lack of government investment really disrupted these transportation systems and isolated many rural and remote First Nations in BC. So as you all know, transportation makes up, the largest share of emissions in BC. We really have a car-centric policies, aging infrastructure. There's a large infrastructure gap, and there's just really a need for more investment into transportation systems, while also contributing to climate change. So we need, some big leadership and investment from government and from uh, led by First Nations. There's a lot of really great examples happening in nations around public transportation, around low carbon transportation. All right, so I'll just get into a little bit about the project. I did already mention the resolution and how it aligns with the climate strategy and action plan, and of course, some of the UNDRIP articles and the action plans federally and provincially. And the purpose of the project is really to seek to accelerate opportunities for First Nations in BC, including rural and remote communities, to access safe, affordable, and reliable low carbon and active transportation. We know that the transition to low carbon transportation is, it needs to be holistic. It needs to recognize that the transportation system is just not meeting the current needs. So it has to, there has to be a hybrid approach, and also, a holistic approach to the way we approach this transition to low carbon transportation. So BCFN's leading this project. We've worked with Community Energy Association in phase one on a few of the deliverables, and the project has been funded by the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions, formerly the Emily, which was the Low Carbon Innovation Ministry. So some of our goals is really, I've kind of touched on them already, is really assessing these gaps and opportunities related to transportation in First Nations and this kind of transition to low carbon. Like, what are the barriers? What are the opportunities? And we really want to advocate for better policy, transportation policy for First Nations, not only to reduce emissions, but to improve access to transportation, mobility, and of course, always uplifting and respecting First Nations title rights and treaty rights. And finally, really to strengthen and support First Nations transportation planning, capacity, and climate awareness. So the project started in 2022, and as you can see, we had a planning and research phase, which Charlotte was our UBC sustainability scholar and did a lot of really great foundational research. We prepared a low carbon transportation planning guide that supported phase one pilot communities. So I'll touch on the communities later, but we had 5 pilot projects, which were First Nations communities, very, distinct realities, distinct culture, history. So it was really rich to support them and work with these pilot communities. We had a survey, interviews, meetings. We had definitely some engagement around drafting this transportation assessment report and action plan. We hosted a low carbon transportation forum last spring, which was really well received. We finalized the transportation assessment report and action plan, which was endorsed, as mentioned before. And now we're working on, what does implementation look like? How can we, advocate for implementation of the various priorities with recommendations outlined in the action plan, which Charlotte can put a link to in the chat, the draft we're working on. We're almost done the final graphic design version, and then we're very pleased to collaborate with the phase 2 pilot communities, and of course working on implementation and action.
I
So the
can.
pilot.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I managed to
oh,
join by my phone, so I can take over
oh.
whenever you like.
Okay, I'll pass it over in a minute. So the phase 1 pilot projects, as you can see, have the green little icons on the map. So you see up to the north, the very north is Deludana Council, the Niska Nation, Estela First Nation, we had Squamish Nation, and we worked with Celtic as well. Celtic actually started in phase 1, and we dedicated, the final report to Leona Humchet. I'm not sure, some of you may have known. She was tragically passed away during phase 1, and she was just a real advocate and leader, and a real climate leader in Celtic, but across Canada and in BC, and so it was a real tragic loss. So Celtic has decided to continue on with the work into phase 2, so we're really honored to continue the work with them on this. And so each and then phase 2, we're working with Skidegate, Clately Tene up near Prince George there, Heltzik continuing on the work, Nanoose and Chawathal and Sawasan and Penticton Indian bands. So we've got a very diverse cross-section of nations, which we're really grateful for, because all our work is really informed by their experiences and the opportunity to kind of collaborate with the pilot projects. And so each pilot project is funded to develop a low carbon transportation plan. So provided support by BCFN, and in phase 1 was Community Energy Association along with BCFN, and we obviously have tools and resources for them, including the First Nations Low Carbon Transportation Planning Guide. And then part of this was also to deliver just a gaps and opportunities analysis report, really to just highlight some of what are those barriers, what are those gaps or issues unique to their nation that they're experiencing because we're finding that it's very, very different, the realities, from Skidegate to, for example, Penticton is much different. And so what are those gaps and opportunities for advocacy, but also to in which we incorporated many of these into our transportation action plan as well. So maybe I'll pass it off to you, Charlotte, if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Kristin. Sorry about all those issues with
Oh, we're so happy you're back. Great. That's
yeah.
excellent.
So I'll continue on, and then Christy, whenever you need to leave, just feel free to do so, and I can help answer questions and direct people.
And let me jump in and say, Kristy, I know you have to go, but thanks so much for joining us. And yeah, real pleasure. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me. I wish I could be here for the whole dialogue, but you're in good hands with Charlotte. So
Understood.
thank you.
Charlotte, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, we wanted to also touch a little bit on the transportation action assessment report and action plan. So this is kind of an accumulation of a lot of the work that we've done so far in the project. It outlines the barriers, opportunities, and recommendations to support First Nations in accessing equitable, safe, affordable, reliable, low carbon, and active transportation. It reflects the realities, needs, and priorities of First Nations based on a holistic research program, which I'll touch on in the next slide. And then it supports first BCFN and First Nations-led advocacy to Crown governments and Crown corporations. So it's meant to be used as a tool for advocacy, not just for us, but for anyone who wants to use it. And then it informs policy, programs, legislation, and investment. So next slide, please.
Hey, Charlotte, do you mind, because I do have to hop off in 5 minutes, would you be able to reshare your screen?
Yes, no worries. I can do that. Okay, let me find the document. Okay. Should we do this? It's easier for me. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, you're good.
Um,
Just go to the full screen on the bottom. Yeah, there you go.
okay. Okay, perfect. So this is some of the inputs towards the transportation action plan. So we've had the BCFN transportation surveys that were carried out, I believe, last year online surveys that were given out to nations throughout the province. And we got some really great feedback from both community members and leadership. Then we had the phase one pilot project communities, which Kristin mentioned. They gave us some really valuable feedback in their gaps analysis reports. Then we had interviews and engagements. We carried out a lot of engagement with governments, other organizations, and then we also had our transportation forum last year and a virtual engagement session to kind of, after we prepared a draft of the guide, to kind of get feedback from nations and chiefs. And then we had a peer review process of the guide. And then, yeah, Kristy mentioned the desktop research that happened at the beginning. Just some quick survey highlights before I move on, just because I think they're quite interesting. So we found that bicycles were one of the most popular low carbon transportation options in terms of nations' priorities. Like just regular bicycles, but also e-bikes were really popular and more so than electric vehicles. We found major barriers to active transportation, including like distances needed to travel, health, safety issues, and a lack of infrastructure. For more than 50% of respondents, their top 3 travel destinations required regional trips. We found a strong interest in public, active, and shared transportation over electrification. And yeah, we also found that 70% of respondents were spending 20% more on transportation, which is double the provincial average. And now I'll quickly go into some of the themes from the Transportation Action Plan itself. So there's many recommendations within each theme, but we try to kind of pick out the major themes that like resonate and to try and make it easier to digest. So I put the link in the chat for the draft reports, and we're going to be releasing our like beautifully graphic design reports very soon. So that will be even easier to look at. But so I'll just go through a couple of these that might be relevant to this group. So the first theme is substantially increase investment and strengthen policies to support multimodal transportation and improve public transit for First Nations. Based on all of the research we've done, that was like one of the main priorities of nations. Number 2, the second theme is close infrastructure gap. So there's a huge infrastructure gap between First Nations and other Canadians, and especially in transportation, you can see this with like poor quality roads, lack of active transportation infrastructure, etc. Theme 3 is advance meaningful improvements in cultural and physical safety. So this is pertaining more towards First Nations women, girls, and to us LGBTQI plus individuals, but also First Nations peoples generally are more at risk of like safety concerns, and when traveling without like a good public transit system, there's many more safety issues that come up in particular. But also, as I mentioned, active transportation infrastructure is also quite poor. So that leads to more safety issues. Number 4 is support First Nations-led self-determined active transportation. I've already covered this. Number 5, enhance First Nations self-sufficiency by building capacity and improving services and infrastructure on reserve. So this is also to reduce the distance that First Nations may need to travel off reserve, building capacity like having hospitals, medical services, schools closer, also internet, and building First Nations government's capacity as well to do their own planning. And then theme 6, prioritize First Nations access, safety, protocols, and rights in marine transportation. So this theme is related to mainly to BC ferries and the services that they provide, but we also recognize that there's some inland ferries as well. But yeah, so we found that a lot of nations have difficulties accessing BC ferry services. Like during tourism season, for example, it's hard to get on a ferry or it might be very expensive. Okay, next slide, if I can figure out how to do that. Let me just scroll. That's easier. The last couple of themes are ensure just transition that centers First Nations rights and self-determination. So this is looking at like the low carbon transition in general, making sure that First Nations are not left behind and that their rights are centered. Number 8, facilitate collaboration, innovation, shared decision making, and partnerships. So this is looking at making sure that First Nations are involved at all levels of governance in transportation planning, and that they are able to make decisions about their own transportation like needs and priorities. Number 9, reform funding and program delivery. So this is looking at and also supporting planning and capacity. This is looking at like government programs in particular, like how to make them more streamlined and more useful for nations, and also to build capacity. And then the last theme is relevant to like zero emission vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and innovation in low carbon fuels and private vehicles. So there's a lot of different recommendations in there regarding like electric vehicles in particular and improving infrastructure and access to them wanted. So yeah, that's the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide any connections as wanted. And yeah, I have our email addresses here as well.
That's great, Charlotte. If you want to stop the sharing and then we can
Sounds good.
open it up to everyone. So I see that Kelly's got a couple of questions. Kelly, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the EV charging questions?
Sure. Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned some of the barriers to, adoption to low carbon methods. Like, what's one of the barriers, like the lack of EV chargers, whether public or residential?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of both. So in a lot of rural and remote First Nations communities, there are not many public chargers. I know that the provincial government recently finished like this electric highway, but if you go off the highways, then it's hard to find those public chargers, and there's not really we've heard that there's not really enough still in the northern and remote areas to encourage people to transition to electric vehicles. Also, like some nations might struggle to have their own residential chargers just because they might not like the grids might not be able to support the increase in electricity demand, and or like they might even just still be on diesel. So it's hard, and also the financial like constraints and like the capacity needed to set up like charges on reserve.
Really, I mean, this really should be the responsibility of BC Hydro. They own the electricity grids, even the ones not on the integrated grid, even the ones that run on diesel and all things like that. They should be the ones responsible for upgrading the electrical capacity and providing those charges. And they do receive a monetary incentive to do so through the low carbon credits.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we work very closely with the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions, and we know that they're trying their best to make all the programs like accessible for First Nations to like apply to build their own charges on reserve and such. But yeah, we find that there's still like a lack of public charges, and then it should also be more but as you mentioned, like BC Hydro and the province working together to really make those changes rather than leaving the onus on First Nations communities. Like the best is if they can do it in partnership, of course, but some nations might not have the capacity to undertake that kind of work.
So if you've got questions, please, raise your hand, or if there's no one with a hand, just jump in. I saw that 50% of the people's trip needs were sort of long distance, inter-regional run, where they're very, very piece, where there is no inter-regional bus service.
Yeah.
Does BCAFN preparing any kind of lobbying strategy to the government to ask to put the pressure on for such inter-regional connections?
We haven't specifically looked at like that ask. Like in our recommendations, there are a number that relate to like improving bus services and like community shuttles as well throughout the province. But yeah, we don't have like a specific ask about regional bus services, I don't believe. But it'd be good to keep in mind when we do carry out some more advocacy work.
Yeah, and to put this in context, we're within the West Coast Climate Action Network. We're in the process of forming the Public Transit Alliance of British Columbia with a date set for our launch on April 28th. And our top demand request is that the government puts attention to it, interregional bus connections. And Eric Doherty, who I see in the line, I'm sure he can add to that. So when it comes to that, we'd love to be able to work with you. And I know there's challenges for you because you've got 203 different First Nations to get on the same page. But Tara, go ahead.
Charlotte and Kristy, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. I was just wondering, the bus North 16 for the Highway of Cheers, when you did this, survey with the other 5 nations that you've taken into consideration, for the policy, were there any nations and any routes that dealt with something like, cultural safety and, the demands for especially because of, missing and murdered Indigenous women and concerns over that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually held our low carbon transportation forum last year in Prince George. So that enabled us to have a lot of nations from the north come to our event, and a lot of people, like that nation spoke about the issues of safety and cultural safety and not being reliable frequent bus routes kind of being a really big issue for safety and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Like I attend a lot of events with BCFN, and I hear time and time again that the lack of public transit options or frequent routes can lead to these kind of problems. Like for example, I remember someone mentioned that a bus to Prince George is kind of like a hub almost where a lot of buses end up, and then if someone takes a bus to Prince George and then misses the bus going out, they might be stranded in Prince George, and that can often then lead to could end up having difficulties getting home or such. So
did any of your First Nations bring up concerns around access to health? If there's a sudden health need or an emergency and you've got to get there, what's it look like on the health access front?
Yeah, that we also heard medical transportation can be an issue because it's very hard to schedule. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I know that a lot of nations found it hard to schedule it, and it would take them maybe a couple of days with public transit to get somewhere, or and then there's not that many options to go back home the same day as well, so they might have to stay in where the hospital is for a couple of days. So there are definitely a lot of issues around that, especially for elders as well. I know some nations have implemented community shuttles to try and help with bringing elders to appointments, but other nations say that their nurses have to personally drive the elders to appointments in town if they can't find someone else to do it.
Yeah. Eric, go ahead. You're on mute.
Yeah.
And to introduce yourself first, because you've got a big transportation background.
Yeah, I'm Eric Doherty. I'm a transportation planning consultant and I live on Lekwungen territory. Um, and I've done quite a bit of work on transportation for people with disabilities. And every time I do this work, one of the things that comes up is the higher rates of disability among First Nations people. And I'm wondering if that's something that came up in your work, and if there's anything specific that has come out in the recommendations regarding people with disabilities, in particular people with disabilities who don't drive.
Hmm. That's a great question. Yeah. We actually don't have any, I don't believe we have any specific recommendations regarding people with disabilities, but we did speak to COS. Their acronym is COSCO. They're like they work for senior.
The Council of Senior Citizens Organizations.
Yes,
There we
that
go.
one. And they were talking to us about like they're trying to get um like active transportation, like bike lanes, to be able to use like motorized wheelchairs on those bike lanes, because currently they're not allowed, and it means that wheelchair users may not be able to have the same access as other people. But yeah, it's a really good point, because yeah, we haven't specifically heard about disabilities like in regards to transportation, but it's definitely good to keep in mind while we work to advocate for the recommendations.
Great. Tara.
Yes, not to hog up all the question period. There was one from one of our, I think, one of our participants. Margot, would you want to unmute yourself and ask about did BC Hydro provide input? Could you further elaborate on that
Oh,
question?
thank you, Tara. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much. I'm wondering whether or not the planning cycle, which I vaguely recall, actually, Eric can probably comment more accurately than I. BC Hydro would be involved in planning for an expansion of their level 3 charger stations and infrastructure, and if they have been in any way involved in discussions about the transportation planning.
Yeah, they joined us last year at the forum as a sponsor. And so like they seem to be quite interested in the work that we're doing. We haven't heard specifically about that expansion. Like they haven't reached out to us about that. But
Okay.
but it would be good to touch base with them to see like what any changes that they're proposing or have implemented, and how that maybe could affect First Nations, or how we can make it more relevant to First Nations communities as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
John Grogan, do you have particular insights into northern transportation and transit health issues?
No, Guy, I don't, but I know that the Northern Health Bus runs to a variety of communities from Prince George and back. That's all I really have to
Yeah. Okay.
add.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me offer a bigger question to you, Charlotte. How can we, as the climate concerned community, help BCAFN to get more attention to your needs and assist? I mean, this is a beginning doing a thing like this, but what more can we do?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. I think we're like right now as well, we're trying to like meet with as many groups as possible to try and get the word out about our reports and try and get a little bit more traction on the recommendations. So I guess I think you're already doing great work with inviting us to like these spaces, and yeah, helping us kind of promote the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
I would have to kind of brainstorm with Christy, like how, and the rest of the team, how maybe we can help more. But I think, yeah, just like knowing that these recommendations exist, like if there's complementary recommendations to your own advocacy, you could point to our report and say like, oh, we like BCFN's also advocating for these things, like nations have also want these changes to be made. For example, like I can see a great link with the public transit, like the ask for more public transit throughout the province, not just in urban areas. There's like a really great fit there.
So George Anderson, who is the Parliamentary Secretary for Transit, lives in Nanaimo. He's, I'm just up the road from me. If you wanted to set up a meeting with, you had connections with the Stoneymoor First Nation or the Halalt or the Common, any of the First Nations on the island, it'd be possible to set up a meeting with him locally in Nanaimo to get direct action to him, direct access, if that was helpful, right?
Yeah, we actually got his contact from someone else. Yeah, but we want to reach out to him for sure.
So we met with him in person last February.
Okay.
And just before your big summit in May in Prince George, and I said, did he know about it? He didn't know about it. We encouraged him to come. I don't think he did attend in the end, did he?
No, and he still doesn't know about the project because
Oh my goodness. Well, we need to rectify that.
Yeah, because I think it was someone else that gave me his contact, like met with them and then gave me his contact. And he's like, he mentioned that he doesn't know about the project. So
if
meet with him.
Right, well, at the minimum, I can email him and ask if you want to do a Zoom call with the two of you, just to learn about it face on, because that's a quick ask, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. I'm going to call on Andy Shadrack from the Kootenays. Andy, do you have any particular Kootenays insight to the struggles First Nations have down there? Do you want to unmute yourself, Andy? Maybe Andy's off getting a cup of coffee. He's just, he's been a valiant fighter in this realm for a long time. Yes, Andy, go ahead. Any particular insights you have to share?
No, I just think there's an overall problem in BC and across Canada. There's a failure to develop alternative mechanisms for living. All right. And both the BC and Canadian governments are focused on trying to produce fossil fuels right now. Complete detriment of First Nations people, particularly in the Northwest and the Northeast. Tremendous health problems as a result of the fossil fuel development in the North.
Yeah.
And the one thing you haven't mentioned today, of course, is there's a train that runs from the coast to Prince George. But it's set up in such a way that the coal trains have preference over the passenger train.
So you might wait
don't
forever.
get there on time. And as she pointed out, people end up getting stranded in Prince George because they can't make their connection. So there is no focus. Ever since we lost Greyhound, for example, the BC government hasn't put in a proper public transportation system.
So let me call on Rosalind from the Okanagan area. Rosalind Warner, do you have any insights from the Okanagan area to share? You're muted. Yeah.
Hi. So only thing to offer here is that I have not heard of any major projects around Indigenous peoples' access to transportation. We're well known as being heavily fossil fuel reliant area, where I think almost up to 30% of our emissions do come from transportation. So I think there's definitely needs to be more information out there about cost-effective, affordable, and effective ways for people to get around town that are not aggravating the situation. I know that the city of Kelowna is very much focused on expanding the road network at the moment because there's a lot of complaints from locals and from tourists about the amount of traffic that we have.
Yeah. Tara, go ahead. Thanks, Rosalind.
Charlotte, I was wondering about, you'd mentioned a hybrid form of transportation. What does that include? Electrical vehicles, diesel vehicles, or, actually hybrid? My son drives a hybrid, battery operated.
Yeah, so I think the reason why we included that was because originally the province didn't provide rebates for certain hybrid vehicles, like the ones that maybe still run mainly on fossil fuel, but have a way to regenerate the power and then use that like a battery and such. The reason we wanted to include that is because some nations were concerned like switching to fully electric vehicles might not be feasible for them, like in really rural, remote areas. And the province's stance was like, oh, well, if you're not fully transitioning, then there might not be any point in doing it at all. But we think that it's a good transition option, and so we included like recommendations to consider all types of vehicles, not just fully electric ones.
Yeah. So another slant on this is I'm the proud founder of the Victoria Car Share Cooperative 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have I'm sure on some reserves, the level of car ownership is probably quite low.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any discussions with Modo, which is now the big car share cooperative, about, putting just one vehicle in a remote community, which could be then shared collectively for when they need it?
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. We had Modo join the forum last year, and we were like kind of discuss like their priority is still just like lower mainland, like Vancouver area. But we also talked to Evo, who is thinking about expanding into other areas maybe. So yeah, it's hard though. Like they kind of want a big network of vehicles in one area usually, rather.
Yeah, that's the way they like to do it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it is a good idea, and we definitely advocate for more car sharing options. Like if a nation wants to do it themselves, they could like maybe partner with them or try and like work out a system themselves.
When we set up the car share co-op in Victoria, we had to partner with a local credit union for the financing because the financial backing to pay for the car it's complicated stuff, right?
Yeah.
So before we finish, I want to, while people are dreaming up any other questions, I got a little gift to share with you all from the Stuminas First Nation about so what we're seeing here, I've just played from the start. No, hang on. The wrong, stop. This play from the existing current slide. This is the Stuminas First Nations historical extent of travel. So the interconnectedness of First Nations is huge, all the way up to Yale and Powell River. And so this is a photograph of 1905, the use of canoes for travel, for getting around locally. And that tradition, look how many people, these are big canoes. That tradition is still continuing. This is 1969 from the Stuminas First Nation. This is like last year, because they're now racing as well. But every year also they have other tribes will come from right across the region and gather there. So this tradition of interconnectedness is what I'm getting at, is so old. And the lack of an interregional bus service, is denying that interconnectedness between different First Nations. Is that a good perspective, Charlotte?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think so. Because in the past, there were so many different ancestral trails, like people traveled by canoe. There were even like ways of traveling on like the rivers and such. And now, there's less options. Even in the past, there was like passenger rail that nations could use or like hop on and off when they liked. Now there's not really that much passenger rail. Actually, we're speaking with a group who is trying to get back the rail from Squamish to 100 Mile House, like turn that into like maybe a viable railway again, a passenger railway again. So that would be great. But I know it's not. Bus services are definitely much cheaper and like easier to kind of implement than those kind of long-term rail services.
So it's coming up to 1 o'clock. Let's wind up here. So Catherine, do you want to put a couple of our links into the chat? We got things coming up. We got our movie night tonight with a deep dive into First Nations stewardship of the rivers around, the Lower Mainland.
Mm-hmm.
We will be announcing the formation of the new Public Transit Alliance of British Columbia in early April when we got our ducks in a row. Ducks are very good at staying in rows, so I hope we keep that organized. And we will be posting the video of this so that you can have access later and we can share it further and wide. We do, as we can, believe it or not, we're all volunteers. We have one person 10 hours a week helping us with all our different things we're doing. The rest of us are all volunteers, but we do really depend on donations to keep us going. So if you feel like, becoming a monthly donor, monthly donors are our key. We have 40 monthly donors who keep us going. If you'd like to become a monthly donor, that's wonderful. And what have I forgotten? I'm not looking at our script here, Catherine. What have I forgotten?
I actually don't have access to the script, but
Oh my goodness.
I'm posting the donation link
Yeah.
here. I'll also post the link to our website. There's lots of good stuff
Yeah.
on the website.
And for the movie night tonight, yeah.
And the movie night I've just posted.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
So it really remains to me to say thank you all for joining us, and thank you too for Charlotte. The troubles with getting the sound were not yours, but the solution was yours.
No.
So you get credit for finding a way around.
No.
Any wrap up things you want to share?
I'll just leave my email in the chat in case you have any questions.
Yeah. And any words of wisdom to leave us with?
Not really. Just keep up the great work. Thank you so much for having me.
And you too, because I'm building this connections with the settler community and with the First Nations who've been here for so many thousand years is such an important part for all of us. Yeah. So thanks everyone. And Margot, do you want to stay on the line when we do our debrief and unwind and stuff like that? We get to know you. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you at another event soon. Thanks Charlotte. That's great. Okay, bye-bye.